Jamil Jaffer's here, founder and executive director of the National Security Institute, former associate White House counsel to President George W. Bush. Jamil, good to see you. Let's start with that steel plant. It is astounding. And thankfully, some people are able to leave. Let's look at the conditions. We have videotape taken inside. It's been bombed by the Russians for 2 months. You're stuck in there with yourself and your loved ones. Food supplies running out. About 1,000 civilians, maybe 2,000 Ukrainian fighters, 600 or so wounded, injured people with gangrene and other horrible conditions. Is this a glimmer of hope that could lead to more in this war in Ukraine?
Well, certainly, Eric, it's good news that we're seeing the Russians permitting the UN to come in and create a safe passage operation for these 100 or so civilians. But as you point out correctly, and as Trey pointed out, there are over 1,000 civilians there, many injured. They've been there for quite a while. This is a rat warren of tunnels, underground passageways that were set up during the Soviet time there in Ukraine. It's a steel plant. But, you know, there's a lot of people down there, including, yes, Ukrainian freedom fighters. But the problem here is that the Russians have been pounding this facility knowing full well that there are civilians there as part of their effort to break the will of the Ukrainian people. They've done it in other cities. They're doing it in Mariupol now, going after schools, hospitals, and the like. This Russian invasion, this Russian illegal invasion, has been brutal when it comes to civilians and has been in violation of every civilized law of war that we're aware of.
Is that a war crime? Is that crimes against humanity being perpetrated by Vladimir Putin and the Russians when they not just attack hospitals and schools, but apartment buildings and that steel plant?
Absolutely. There's no question, Eric, that a number of the strikes that the Russians have undertaken are war crimes. We've seen the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, say so directly, that that's the view of the U.S. State Department. There's no question about that. Now, in the case of this steel facility, one might argue, well, there are fighters there. They're targeting a military target. We can debate that question. But the fact of the matter is that, as you point out, the hospitals, the schools, the apartment buildings, nobody can question that the Russians are targeting civilians. They've laid siege to cities, trying to starve Ukrainian civilians out. This is a brutal war, and it's brutal because Vladimir Putin has made it so. It's critical that the allies do more, not just weapons, not just humanitarian assistance, but at some point say, enough is enough. We're going to bring this war to a close.
How do they do that? We've got some word that Slovakia is finally about to provide some MiG-29s to help with the fight over the skies of Ukraine, that Poland is going to supply F-16s to cover Slovakia to protect them, and Slovakia is sending MiG-29s to Ukraine. Is this the type of step that the West and others need to do to finally push Putin back?
Well, look, we've been talking about MiG-29s now, as Eric, as you know, for weeks on end. The Biden administration was apparently going to backfill Poland's MiG-29s. Poland was ready to provide them. Ultimately, those didn't get provided. It's good Slovakia is doing it. There's a lot more that can be done. You know, we've been ramping up our military provision of supplies to the Ukrainians, sort of bits and pieces along the way, in part in response to Vladimir Putin's activities. We've got to stop letting him set the pace of this war and take back the advantage, give the Ukrainians the advantage. They've done heroically defending their own country better than anyone would have expected, but there's a lot more to be done. And the fact of the matter is, Eric, I think at some point, if it means Western troops, American NATO troops, so be it. If we're going to bring this war to an end and bring Vladimir Putin and push him out of that country, what he's done thus far is completely unacceptable. We need to bring this war to a close.
Well, Eric, you know, some think they're afraid that will lead to nuclear war if U.S. troops and NATO troops go into Ukraine. At least that's apparently what, you know, Putin and Sergei Lavrov have intimated.
Well, look, I mean, we can't be afraid of a nation with nuclear weapons, right? Vladimir Putin is engaged in an illegal war. If we're afraid of going up against any nation with nuclear weapons, that means Taiwan is at stake when the Chinese go after that. We can't have that be the standard. The standard has to be, is there a problem here? Are they doing something illegal? Are they targeting civilians? And if so, can we do something about it successfully? And look, let's be honest here, Eric. Vladimir Putin does not want a war with the West any more than we want a war with him. Mm-hmm. It is highly unlikely he's going to come after our troops, but we have to take the chance, if that's what it takes, to protect the thousands and thousands of civilians that are already being killed and the millions, Eric, that have fled as refugees both across Europe and now within Ukraine itself.
Yeah, some think that, you know, it's been intimated. Some say, well, it's like World War III at a different scale now, or a proxy war. Here's Samantha Power. This morning, she's the former UN ambassador to the United Nations under President Obama, and is now the head of the International Agency for International Development, talking about that very same thing. That is not the right tape. So she basically was talking about the grain and the issues with grain in Ukraine and how George Stephanopoulos asked, is this kind of basically World War III? Some have said that. Do you subscribe to that notion that Putin sees it as NATO and the West against him, while we see it as protecting the sovereignty of Ukraine?
Well, he certainly has framed it that way. You know, and he sees it as us already going up against him because we're supplying weapons into this fight. So the question is, well, why, if we're already sees it that way, that's how he sees it, why not bring more weaponry in? Why not give the Ukrainians a real fighting chance? And if we need to, let's do what we need to protect the Ukrainians and that society. Vladimir Putin went in illegally. There was no cause for his crossing that border, no matter what he says. We all know the truth. And the fact is that at some point you have to say, enough civilians have been killed. There's enough damage going on. We can't accept this happening within Europe. I mean, what's the line, Eric? Is it chemical weapons? Is it nuclear weapons? What does Vladimir Putin have to do to get us to say enough is enough? In my view, we're there.
You think Ukraine will win?
You know, it's hard to know. Putin has done a good job, really put a stranglehold on their economy. They have fought heroically. We provide them a lot of weaponry, but it's an uphill battle against ultimately a stronger Russian military. If Vladimir Putin is successful at getting a full buildup, spun up within Russia, which is an argument that he's making, and it appears that he may have the support of the Russian people. If that happens, very difficult for the Ukrainians to win. And even if they push back, it's going to come at the cost of, hundreds of thousands of civilian lives. That's not a cost we or they should have to bear.
It is a war ongoing because of one man, Vladimir Putin. Jamil Jaffer, good to see you, Jamil, as always. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.